Good morning, everyone. My name is Phil Cates, and I'm the field crops educator based in Lapeer County. And most of my responsibilities focus on forages and field crops. And this morning, we're privileged to have Dr. Kim Cassida talking about winter kill in alfalfa. It's been a difficult winter, a difficult fall last year, and so we're seeing a lot of fields of alfalfa that are struggling. And so we're going to ask Kim to share her thoughts this morning. And again, we will have the chat box open. If you have questions, make sure and type them in, and we'll make sure to ask Kim about those at the end of her presentation. Thanks, everyone. Kim, you want to share your screen for us, please? Virtual breakfast on its way.
Good morning, everyone. I think we had originally planned for me to talk about something else today in relation to alfalfa, but with all the reports we're hearing from around the state of winter damage stands, we thought this would be a more timely topic. We are getting reports in from anywhere that, some people, our stands are fine, and in other places we're hearing about up to 80% loss on fields. So obviously this is concerning people as we go into where normally first cut would be coming up on us really fast. And it's looking like some of these stands are not going to be producing very much alfalfa. So people are, wondering what to do and what they're looking at on fields. So first I want to start out by talking a little bit about how to evaluate a field and determine what the degree of damage is that you have. So you have different things that you can see as a sign that you've got winter damage. Obviously one of them is frost heaving. It's in this close-up of this plant right here, which is actually about 2 inches out of the ground. It is not likely that that plant is going to survive, even though it's trying to. It's got some shoots coming out of it. When crowns heave out, they can work themselves back down into the ground about a ½ an inch, but when they're out this far, it's just a matter of time before that plant is going to be dead. So you need to be, if you have a lot of those in your stand, you need to be thinking about long-term of what you're going to be doing. Another obvious sign of winter damage is when you have large dead patches like this. In this particular field, this is due to water ponding, even though this is the side of a hill. It had areas where water moves across it, and it's very typical for winter damage to be concentrated in these areas because ice sheets will form even under the snow, even if you don't see them. But there are other more subtle things that can be a sign of winter damage. So you might just notice that your alfalfa just seemed exceptionally late to break dormancy. Or you may see a stand like this one where you have some plants that are big and vigorous and others that are just barely starting, as in this close-up over here. Here's the big plant in the background and the smaller shoots in the front. So what is actually happening here is that alfalfa sets its first flush of crown buds for spring growth in the previous fall, and those will sit there right underneath the soil all winter, ready to pop in the spring as soon as the weather's good. If those buds get damaged by the cold weather, the plant may still survive, but it has to send up a new group of buds. Basically, you're starting second cut early, and those ones will be delayed. So that's what these are, is the plant playing catch up. But obviously this can affect your yield in your first cutting. And also you don't know what degree of damage you actually have on these plants that are exhibiting the slow growth. So in order to evaluate that, you really need to go out and dig some roots. This picture illustrates the part of the alfalfa root rating system that we do not like to see. A healthy root is white and clear all the way down through the taproot. Anytime you start to see any brown discoloration in the taproot, you have degrees of damage happening. This would be rated as a 3. You see there's not very many shoots on this plant, and the crown rot is extending down into the center of the root, in this case all the way down to as deep as they've dug it here. And then a greater degree of damage in this 4. If you're seeing a lot of roots in your stand that are in these two categories, this is not good. We want a healthy alfalfa stand will have no more than 30% of the plants in the stand will be in these categories. because the fifth category is dead. This is progressing in a bad direction. Yeah, why isn't my slide in? There we go. So a lot of people are asking, what caused this? So obviously the cold winter weather is a big part of it, and there's nothing that we can do about that. We had exceptionally cold weather for part of the winter, and that was actually complicated by the fact that fall was kind of late and alfalfa was slow to go dormant in the first place. In a lot of parts of the state, we had a lack of snow cover. Snow cover will help insulate the plants and protect them from that cold weather. And we had several ice storms in several places, which will cause that ice sheeting that will suffocate the plant. Another complicating factor was that the fall was so wet. To begin with, alfalfa does not like wet. And the wet weather delayed a lot of fall operations. So, for example, some people were late getting out there with fertilizer or manure that they were applying on alfalfa, ended up driving on it late in the year on wet ground, which can cause a lot of traffic damage. In some cases, the fertilizer never got out there, which can lead to low soil potassium, fertility, and potassium is the most important nutrient in terms of helping plants tolerate cold weather. So that's one of the first things we see when potassium fertility is low, is we'll see greater winter kill. And lastly, when people are harvesting in that 6 weeks before the killing frost in the fall, you're potentially damaging the ability of the alfalfa to get through the winter because you're using up part of the energy reserves that it needed to keep in order to survive that cold weather. So some of these things are something we can do things about in future. Others of them, we have to take what nature deals out to us. The first step in deciding what to do is to assess your stand and decide whether it's good enough to keep. A stand that is healthy, we would typically see at least 5 healthy plants per square foot. The healthy plants would be the ones that don't have root disease at the level that I showed. But it's difficult to evaluate how many plants you have per square foot without digging, because crowns could be crowded together. You can have 2 plants right next to each other. So an easier way to do that is actually to count the stems, because those are easy to count. And in a healthy stand, we want to see greater than 55 stems per square foot. We also want to see in the field no large dead areas. So if you have a stand that meets those characteristics, you're probably going to be fine, because if you have at least this many stems and plants, the remaining plants will grow and get bigger and maintain your yield. When you only have 40 to 55 stems per square foot, you're starting to get into the questionable region, and at this point you should be assessing your root health very stringently to make sure that you don't have those unhealthy plants out there, because once they reach that level of root damage, they are on their way out. It's just a matter of time before that plant dies. So you have a little bit of fudge time to decide what to do, but you need to be thinking about what you're going to do with that stand. And also you need to evaluate the total area that is dead in the field. You could have a few very small, very healthy areas, but if 80% of the field is dead, obviously you need to want to do something. And then you need to be thinking about taking an action when your stem count drops below 39 stems per square foot, or you have 50% or more of that level 3 or 4 root disease, or greater than 50% dead area. So what can you do? Basically, I see 2 options. You can either try and extend the lifespan of that stand by overseeding, or you can replace it. So this slide is going to address what to do with the overseeding idea. What you cannot do is you cannot try and thicken it up with more alfalfa seed, because as most of you probably know, but I always run into a few people that don't, alfalfa is toxic to its own seedlings, so you cannot go into a stand that has had alfalfa on it, or that currently has living alfalfa in it, or that has had alfalfa within the last year, and expect to have good success with seeding alfalfa. However, we can overseed with other things. So if you're trying to get like 1 more year of forage out of it, some options are overseeding with annual ryegrass. at about 5 to 10 pounds per acre, or small grains. So you could use, most typically you use oats or triticale, but other things are also possible, at a rate of 50 to 75 pounds per acre. And what that does is help all of these things. It fills in the gaps in the stand where the alfalfa has died out so that you can boost your yield that way. Obviously, it's not going to have the same forage quality as a pure alfalfa stand. Things that might last 2 years include red clover at 6 to 10 pounds per acre, or Italian ryegrass at 5 to 10. Now note the difference between annual ryegrass, which is a true annual, and Italian. Annual ryegrass will die after it flowers, and Italian ryegrass will not flower in the first year, so it will not die until the second year. So you'll get 2 years worth of growth out of it. If you want to keep that stand in for a longer period of time, maybe 3 or more years, you can consider adding a perennial grass like orchard grass, tall or meadow fescues, or timothy. Those will not give you as much boosted yield in the first year that you plant them because they're a little slow to get going, and they will also progressively take over your alfalfa stand. So each year you will have more grass and less alfalfa, but it can give you some more time before you need to replant them. And the second option is to take out the alfalfa stand and just rotate to a different forage or a different crop completely. So some of the options there are, if you want to maintain a pure stand of legumes, so you're using it as a protein source, maybe you're feeding to dairy cows or whatever, your two options are using red clover or an annual clover. And the two annual clovers that have some potential in Michigan are berseem and crimson. We just finished up a research trial that evaluated clovers across the state as a short-term forage crop, and berseem clover actually yielded more than red clover did in its seeding year in the southern part of the state. So say if you're south of about the middle of the lower peninsula, that can be a good option, but it didn't perform very well far north. In the farther north parts of the state, crimson clover was a better yielder. And still, none of these are going to give you the yield of alfalfa. A pure stand of red clover or berseem might give you maybe in best case scenario a couple of cuttings and 2 to 3 tons of dry matter, but it will take up the space for that year when you are waiting for the alfalfa autotoxicity to dissipate, and it will give you a high protein forage. So some of your other options, if you don't need the protein, include short season silage corn. Obviously, that's an easy choice. Oats or spring triticale can work and can make good feed for dairy cows at certain stages of their production cycle. Oats and peas actually can make planted together, can make a pretty good dairy forage. Another option that's a warm season plant include the sorghum family, which is our forage sorghum, Sudex, or Sudan grass. And these work out kind of nice in the system because these actually need a really warm soil to grow well. And so we don't usually plant those until June anyway. So you're really not behind at all in terms of thinking about getting those in for this year. They are a little bit of a gamble in Michigan because they really like hot weather, and sometimes we don't get weather that's hot enough for them to meet their yield potential. Another warm season option is pearl millet, which is managed similarly to the sorghums. And teff might be an option, particularly if you are a hay producer. A lot of these other options up here make better silage than they do hay, but teff is a annual hay crop that's actually in pretty good demand in the horse hay market. So if you found yourself with a shortage of hay ground, that might be a good option for that rotation year. And I just want to finish up with a little plug here for our Agriculture Innovation Day, which is going to be July 26th this year on campus. And our focus is going to be precision technology that pays. This is going to be aimed at, unfortunately, at row crops and not alfalfa, but that's probably partly because we don't have a lot of precision technology yet that applies to alfalfa. But it'll be a great program. You should all come. And then thank you for attending our virtual breakfast. Here are our sponsors. MSU Extension Field Crops, the field crop team puts this on.
Kim, we have a question.
Okay.
And it's a management question as much as anything.
Okay.
What is the best way to convert a fallow field without tillage or a drill into a Roundup ready alfalfa field?
Without a drill.
Right.
That's challenging. Let me think about this. So
while you're thinking about
yeah.
Kim, while you're thinking about that, let me just say that for anyone that joined us after we started, there is.
You just cut out, Phil.
I'm sorry. In the chat box, there is an evaluation that I'm going to send to everyone, and if you would be kind enough to fill that out, that would be great. Just click on the chat box, and there will be a link on the right-hand side of your computer, I believe. All right, Kim, go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking about that. Is the problem with alfalfa is that it is really not one of our better. A lot of legumes will establish pretty well if you just broadcast them. Alfalfa is not one of those. It is notoriously poor to establish it with broadcasting, and without any kind of tillage at all on this field, I think you would have a really hard time getting a nice stand of alfalfa. I would highly recommend to try and figure out a way to get your hands on a drill somehow. You can find a neighbor. Some of the conservation districts have drills that they will be able to rent. And
Kim, another question has come in about alfalfa and the fall buds. On alfalfa crops that have lost their set of fall buds and are setting new ones this spring, what can those plants be expected to do this year? Can you expect normal yield in second and third cutting?
Yeah, you probably will. Well, I will modify that. If they are being slow and the roots were also damaged, that's going to slow them down. But if all that happened was that set of buds got burned off, then basically all you're doing is putting second cut now became first cut. So, it depends mostly on the weather, how alfalfa yields in each cutting. So I would suggest, if you think that's happening, go out and dig a few plants and see what the condition of your roots look like. And if they look good, then you're probably just going to expect second and third cutting should be pretty normal.
Last question. Can you bale or dry pearl millet?
It can probably be done, but it's got a really big fat stem. So it probably, you need good drying weather, and you would definitely need to condition it. So, but you can make hay out of it.
Okay.
But, it's always challenging in Michigan to get hay dry.
One more follow-up on the alfalfa buds. Should we delay first cutting?
That can be a good method to give your plants a little bit more time to replenish those roots. You could, instead of cutting at late bud, you could go to let it go to 1/10 bloom on that first cutting. Never hurt. Hopefully we'll have the ground dry out so that cutting it when you want to cut it will actually be a good option.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you for all your information. That was terrific and very timely.